is dangerous rhetoric about foreigners getting worse? Well, I can't answer that exact question, but today we are going to talk about this video and break it down a little bit.
Do you think Korea should take in more foreigners?
I do think that Koreans are taking in a lot of foreigners now. It's become easier to get visas as a foreigner. Back in the day, oh my gosh.
Back in the day.
Over time, I've noticed foreigners working in, Korean shops, in Korean restaurants and stuff like that, which is something you didn't see before. I do think that there should be a point where Koreans draw a limit. I know this sounds very extreme, but I do think that Koreans in general have lost a lot of their culture. You'll notice a lot of things that were beautiful about Korea less common. So I do think that Koreans should, at least, even if they accept foreigners, they should retain some of the culture that made Korea Korea. Korea feels very westernized now, you know what I mean?
First, I want to say that I got this clip from Instagram, and I think there's way too many of these street interviews these days, and nobody actually has anything good to say or ask in these videos anymore. An example of a good street interview would be from the famous Dr. Mike's channel. He asked people to ask him their medical questions, and he answered them with a lot of sincerity, and that was a good example of a street interview. But instead of content like that, we're just getting so much content like this of people kind of talking out of their you-know-what. So I also looked at the comments to get some background from these creators, and here's what I think is really going on here. So first, he does not like the influx of foreigners because he views it as more competition for the types of jobs that foreigners can have, which is ironic because, it is limited to certain jobs, even though he said he thinks that there's too many people coming in and they should make it harder to come in here. And obviously, he feels that way because he feels like it's hurting himself, not necessarily everybody else. I think he really enjoyed the novelty that he had as being like one of the only foreigners and being just a straight white man in Korea, without having a lot of competition. He said he came here a long time ago. Now, I will say that I think there has been an ever so slight influx of, younger and maybe more talented people, and he feels clearly threatened by that. Apparently, he is a content creator, so I could definitely see this being the case because there used to be only a very small number of expat in Korea channels, and now there are so many, mine included, of course. So he clearly liked being the only one. And of course, the irony of that is that one of the reasons that more people decided to visit Korea or study in Korea is because of those channels. And now that he climbed that ladder, he really wants to kick it out from under him. So in the video, he said that it's really easy to come here, and maybe he felt it was really easy for himself to come here. It is a very vague statement, right? To come here, what does that mean? To be a tourist, to be a student, there's many different ways you can come here. And so it is much too vague of a statement to really have any impact or any meaning, but again, I'm gonna try to break it down a little bit. It is kind of true that it is a little bit easy to get a working visa, but know that these jobs are very demanding. And if you want to be a teacher or have certain jobs, you do need the college degree and you need to get your background check and everything like that. You can't just hop on over here. You do need the 4-year degree usually, unless you're doing farm work. And again, it's very limited to demanding jobs, like being a teacher and doing, farm work. Again, also kind of limited to jobs in the middle low pay range, and we're talking about the majority here, not a minority. Additionally, I think he's mainly talking about work visas, so let's talk about that for a minute. So when you're on a working visa, you need a job all the time. You need to be officially employed somewhere, and you have to do whatever your boss or work wants you to do. And this usually means, working, like I said, very demanding jobs. So, for example, being an ESL teacher, you can look up videos. It's very demanding. Or working on a farm or working in a factory. There was, if I can find the article, I'll put it here. But there was a factory explosion, and most of the people who died in the factory explosion were actually contracted workers from abroad. It is also important to remember that while you can stay in Korea for a long time with a working visa, you cannot get the visa for more than a year. So you must renew it every year, basically, and you have to meet certain requirements as well to do that. We might also be talking about the slight, again, ever so slight influx of international students in Korea. So, one, they are paying a lot of money to go to school here. Two, they have a lot of stipulations on how much and when they can work. Plus, a student visa is still technically a short-term visa. Now, let's talk about long-term visas. They are much harder to get, and you have to prove either like recent-ish Korean heritage, you have to get married, have kids, or get more than one of these things. And there is one long-term visa that I'm aware of for foreigners who have to rack up enough points through Korean language tests and community service and more stuff like that. Having a certain number of years already lived in the country, you have to have enough money in your bank account, so you rack up points, and then you get entered into a lottery for which there are a limited number of spots. And then once you have enough points to get entered, they will just randomly choose the people for the already limited number of spots. It's already limited. It's the only way to get a long-term visa without having the Korean spouse, like marrying in, having Korean heritage, or some other kind of stipulation that you need to get the long-term visa. So again, he said they should control the number of people, or limit the number of people coming in, because there's so many people now. And again, I think he's seeing like tourists here, and they shouldn't limit the number of tourists, but they are limiting the number of people who can really come in and stay and like put down roots here, because that's why they have a lottery, to limit the number of people coming in, right? It's already limited. I don't know how many other ways I can say this, so I'm gonna assume that you're all smart enough to get it by now. And so yeah, he's wrong. And as far as work visas go, it might seem like, wow, there's such an influx of teachers, or there's such an influx of, I don't know, farm workers or factory workers. I doubt that this guy works in a factory. Or there's such an influx of content creators, right? And again, that is also limited to demand. So you can only get a job if there's a job available for you. And the types of jobs that you can get on a working visa in Korea are limited. You can't just get any job. I'm sure he didn't think these things through, and he was just babbling off the top of his head, but I do think these are dangerous things to just say online, and I think it's important to set the record straight. What he said was not factually accurate. He also mentioned foreigners, probably students, like I said, working in Korean food restaurants, working part-time jobs that don't pay that much. So probably students, though, are some of the only people who could do that because they study Korean, the Korean language. Anyway, then he said that many beautiful things about the culture are disappearing, and Korea's becoming so westernized now. And so let's tackle the latter part of that sentence first. So I'm assuming that by Western he means white, which is also not accurate, right? We know these Western countries are actually like melting pots of different ethnicities. And I'm guessing he's also generally talking about North America and Europe. So first, has he been to Europe or America lately? Because they are both so different in values, in cuisine, and everything from Korea. I've been there probably more recently than this guy to both Europe and America. And they are so different. So for example, like a small example, Koreans might go out to eat and get, pizza, which is also Korean version of pizza. They might get Western food, but trust me, they're still cooking, rice and kimchi at home. They're not really losing like that part of their culture. And part of their culture is not just to eat Korean food out in restaurants, they eat it at home too. I would say more people in Korea have rice cookers than dishwashers, and that's not true, like necessarily true in every Western country or every part of a Western country. There are many more examples that come to my mind, but I can also say very like blatantly, like kind of the manners in public are very different. They have very different expectations in Western countries than they do in Korea. For example, spitting in the street, that is a Korean thing. Everybody else hates that. Like every foreigner hates that. Even foreigners from Japan and Singapore, which are not Western countries, hate that. So also the public transportation here is very unique, even again from other Asian countries. It's even more unique from Western countries. So I could go on, but I won't. I also have to wonder if maybe by westernized he means more developed. And I'm sorry, but that would be like wrong and mean of him if that's what he meant. Because, Korean people shouldn't have to live in these old, falling apart buildings to like preserve their heritage. They should be allowed to build high-rise apartments. It's a very urbanized country. Everybody kind of lives in like two cities, and so the high-rise buildings are kind of necessary and they're more efficient, and people like living in them, from what I know at least, which is also another way that that United States is different from Korea. Americans love their houses, Koreans love their apartments. But anyway, I would never deny somebody a better life or the life they want, or a westernized bathroom, for example, instead of a wet room, because I think it's ruining their culture. So now let's tackle the first part of that sentence, the beautiful things being ruined by westernization. So I really looked into this, I did, and I really couldn't find anything. There's no historical landmarks that are like being ruined by tourism from what I could find in articles and from word of mouth. Again, I couldn't find that like foreigners were taking jobs from Korean people, which again is generally a stereotype of immigrants that I don't subscribe to. I couldn't find anything like either objective or subjective that was bothering Korean people, or Korean people felt like their culture was being like stamped down. And according to my Korean boyfriend, who's more in the loop than I am, he could also not understand what he meant by like beautiful cultural things that are disappearing. And he also didn't think that having a foreign server in a restaurant like ruins the food or makes the taste any different. But what he did say is that, he did wish that Korea would actually become a little bit more comfortable around people who look different. Because it is very annoying when we go out and people are always staring. But something that we did agree on very easily was that Korea is very globalized, as much as they want to be, and they have access to Western things, which is true. But society itself is actually not that westernized. Additionally, we agreed that most people in Korea have difficulty learning and understanding English, despite their years of studying, which is a whole other video, to be honest. So I'm not going to get into it too much, but again, that's why there are so many native teachers to help people learn, and because Korean people have to learn English to do business with other companies, not just in America and Canada and England, but also in other European countries where people do speak English. Also, it's important to note that this is not a colonizing situation. even though some people are white. Only Koreans are in power. The language mostly spoken is still Korean. People do, like I said, struggle to be fluent in English. And even foreigners who are married and on the long-term visa through marriage and having children to a Korean spouse, plus Korean Americans or like people who are here on the long-term visa with Korean heritage are not allowed. So even like partly Korean people are not allowed to be involved in politics in any way, shape, or form. Nobody with any kind of visa is allowed to even protest or buy coffee for protesters. There was a problem with that with a Korean American celebrity recently, who bought food or something like that. They got involved with the anti or pro-union protest or something like that. And there were other people on visas getting involved in the protests, and that was a problem at some point for them getting, arrested or deported. So again, it's not a colonizing situation. We are not allowed to get involved in politics in any way, and we have to be really careful about that. All of this aside, I want to say, most importantly, I do think that the guy in this video is spreading very dangerous words, and I think that Koreans are really vulnerable to this messaging for two reasons. First, the low birth rate that they can't come back from. This has caused a lot of fear and anxiety and uncertainty amongst Korean people about what's going to happen to their country in the future. Second, this is important, Korea has a history of brutal invasions that has left them with a sense of nationalism, which is usually not too bad. But again, when they study history, they see their country being brutally invaded over and over again throughout history, and that can leave some kind of fear and a victim mindset. So you have these two things kind of mixed together, and I think these words are really dangerous because of that. I mean, I think they would be dangerous anywhere. But all of this is just to say, whether you're a foreigner in Korea or Korean American or whomever, please do not heed this guy's messaging or any of this kind of messaging. And when you see these kind of street interviews, don't forget to ask yourself, like, what exactly did that person mean when they said this thing? Ask yourself, what did they exactly mean? Because this guy made a lot of vague statements that were filled with words but meant nothing. So remember to ask yourself these questions, of course. And I want to end by saying I fully believe this guy thinks that immigration is hurting him, and he has not thought about whether or not immigration is hurting Korean people, but he only sees things through his lens. So his view is that immigration is hurting me, so it must be hurting everybody else too. That is my opinion of what I think where I think this guy is coming from. And I want to also add that most developed countries are melting pots for a reason. Having a country that is so inhabitable is actually a flex, and this guy probably does not really care about Koreans and Korean society as a whole. Thanks for watching my video. Please like and subscribe. Thanks, bye!